I'm going to talk about one of the unsupervised machine learning algorithms that we applied on a large US data set to predict how human risk perceptions shape behaviors and policy action. This is part of a larger project that CSync and NIMBIOS has funded since last 3-4 years, which is about integrating human risk perceptions of global climate change into dynamic Earth system models. And this particular work that I'm going to present is just one small component of the larger project. The motivation behind this project is about the impacts of global climate change, how they are going to be differentiated across the planet, and the risk that people face is different across different regions of the world. Whether you're living on the Arctic or the northern latitudes or the equatorial regions of the world, you will have differentiated risk. If you look at the changes in the water dynamics, that the risk even also differs drastically. So the extent of the risk magnitude, like how much risk you face, depends on how much mitigation happens in terms of the greenhouse gas emissions, but also how much adaptation happens. A lot of the existing integrated assessment models that Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change uses does not account for the effect of the risk perceptions. So one of our major motivations for this work is to understand the feedback effect of how human risk perceptions of climate change could contribute to switching human behaviors from fossil fuel intensive pathways to climate friendly behaviors and policies. So the approach that we are using comprises a variety of supervised and unsupervised machine learning algorithms. We apply them to understand how these human risk perceptions, cognition, affect, emotion, trust of scientists, and past experience can influence the adoption of green behaviors. In this particular study, I was able to access climate change in the American Mind data set that's been collected by Yale University between 2008 and 2014 with 13,400 observations. So this applies to the entire US population. And we applied a variety of theoretical approaches, but we settled on the integrated approach because none of the theory by themselves can predict the behavior correctly. So this is just a snapshot of one of the final models that came out after about 10,000 runs. The model predicts about 89% of the explains 89% variation, and it has a calibration index of 73.99%. The node sizes are basically reflect the overall pullback linear divergence that basically explains that the bigger the size of the node, the more explanatory power it has in terms of explaining the joint probability distribution of the entire data set. And the arcs are basically the mutual information, that is the difference between the marginal and conditional entropies that Sam was earlier on talking about. So what we find is that, first of all, the green behaviors are modulated by the activism against corporations. So the people who are actively engaged in protesting against fossil fuel corporations are more likely to adopt green behaviors. But that in itself, the biggest factor in this overall picture is that if you think that the global warming victims are going to be somebody close to you, and if you have somebody so there are like spatial effects, and the people who are going to be harmed and the ecosystem are going to be harmed, that basically determines your attitude towards that, but also your perceptions about actor responsibility and collective responsibility about how is this global warming going to affect you. And then another important factor that we found out is that the role of the equity in the government role, as well as what government has to do in terms of the vis-a-vis markets, that determines whether you take a policy action or not. So your support for the policy action also determines how much you are actively protesting against the corporations. And finally, we also found that the ideology, even though in standard survey studies comes out to be very significant, it has a very small role to play in the big picture. So we continue to plan to implement this research at the global data set for about 100 other countries, and this model would be replicated, and we see whether it stands out in those countries. Thank you.